wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, which got a lot of attention back in the 90s, and he really looked at the ways in which companies and organizations fail to innovate quite often, even though they have market-leading positions. And he was really wondering about this question about why not? Why does one great company after another disappear? And these are companies that feel unassailable to us, that they'll be around forever. And you can list all the ones for which that is no longer true. Wayne Computers in the US, Honeywell, Digital Equipment Corporation. He was looking at the computer industry in particular. So he developed a theory of innovation that has really become very popular. And this past year, wrote a book called The Innovative University. And this has become the hot topic in the United States. Clay is at conference after conference. And it comes at a time when there's a lot of conversation about how we have to rethink the university in the United States and the ways in which it's failing. So I'm going to give you a very brisk run through some of that, and then I'll slow down whenever somebody wants to give me a wave. Please don't be shy about saying, can you stay a little longer on this topic? But we have limited time, so I want to go quickly. So let me see if I have this. This is not on. Mr. Innovation can't turn on the pointer. So I'm going to talk a little bit, excuse the United States-centric notion here for a moment, but within our own country, to give you a little bit of optics into the US's situation, we used to be the #1 country in the world for the percentage of adults with post-secondary ed degrees. We are now 11th or 12th, depending on how you count. We have been slipping steadily. The numbers you see on the left are age cohorts. So if you look back when 55-year-olds were 21-year-olds, we were #1. But look at what's happening now with our young population. And we need to add a lot of degree holders by 2020 just to keep up with the coming wave of retirements. Let me give you one statistic, and this also points to another issue we have with STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. Lockheed Corporation, in the next 5 years, just one corporation, Lockheed, will retire more engineers than all of the United States higher ed system will produce in the next 5 years. That's one company. It's a crisis in our system. 70% of the new jobs in the United States require a post-secondary ed degree of at least 2 years or its equivalent. And at a time when, again, we are falling well behind. So we'll skip over this. I'm going to try to go faster here. So by 2018, the United States will be short 3 million post-secondary degrees. We're now ranked 12th. And globally, we would need to produce, we need to create places for 98 million learners over the next 15 years. That's how many people that the sort of economists say that the globe needs in terms to fill the sort of projected job needs of the future. This is the equivalent of building an Ohio State University, one of our massive campuses of 60,000 students, building an Ohio State University every week for the next 10 years. That's what it would require. It's not going to happen. We need to find new solutions to this. Not only do we not educate enough people, in the United States at least, there's some real serious questions about the quality of the education we do give. And there was a book a year and a half ago called Academically Adrift, which became the hot topic of that year, which basically called into account higher education in the US for not adding much value. And you take a look at these statistics where no gains reported for 45% of our students in the first 2 years. It used to be in the United States that if somebody graduated with a bachelor's degree, it was a proxy. And that proxy meant certain things. It meant that you could read, it meant that you could write, you could think critically, that you had quantitative reasoning skills, and employers took that as a sort of act of faith. Employers no longer do that. Employers now tell us we see too many college graduates who come in and they're not prepared to get in front of a room and communicate. They're not prepared to write well. They don't write well. And the other thing that's happening is as we move away from those basic skills, we really think of those as sort of high school skills in many ways. As we move away from those, there's a real question now about the skills we do provide. MIT just did a long study that looked at their graduates 5 years after graduation. And it was the skills, the things they learned at MIT in their engineering education made up only 20% of the skills that they use every day. So they're really having a soul-searching kind of re-examination about what is the education that we do, how do we know, what matters. So you get a whole, and then for us, of course, cost, which has, in the United States, we're fond of talking about the astronomical cost of healthcare. It's dwarfed by the astronomical increases in the cost of higher education. So we see more and more people shut out of the system. And in our country, borrowing makes up a lot of the gap. And the accumulated debt for college is now greater than all credit card debt in the United States. So it gives you some sense of what families are doing. So we have in many ways a system, and I call it a system in quotes because it isn't a system. In the United States, it's a crazy quilt mix of all kinds of things, and that's part of its strength. There's a school out there for everybody, but it's a deeply uncoordinated amalgam of institutions. And the things that are getting in the way, to some extent, faculty, culture, and governance, with a rightful emphasis on quality that matters, they move very slow, glacially slow in the context of the global economy and what we need to do and what we need to address. Clayton talks a lot about chasing status. Two-year colleges want to offer four-year degrees. State colleges want to be state universities. State universities want to be research universities. Research universities want to be top-tiered. And we go on and on and on. We have a craft model of educational delivery. That is, there is inherent limitations on how much education one faculty member can provide, how big a class, et cetera. So we've kind of milked that system as far as it will go. We've added teaching assistants and study groups and all those things that we can do, but there is a limit at the end of the day. Money is an issue, as I've talked about, and then outdated knowledge models. And we know increasingly that the way that we organize academic departments doesn't reflect the way that people live and work and solve problems. Give credit to Arizona State University. If you haven't had a chance, take a look at the way that they're re-engineering their curriculum. They're blowing up their department structure. They're reorganizing around questions. How to save cities is a question. And the group of faculty and students who are enrolled in that program are from across disciplines. It's really an interesting model, getting a lot of attention. Also, the other thing that we have as a backdrop is we're not only not working very well in terms of our educational system, but we're increasingly entering into an age of dramatic shifts in the nature of work and labor. Dramatic shifts. I think we're just on the cusp of it. I was at a conference at IBM at the Elmenden Research Center last September that brought together people in technology, education, the workforce. We increasingly will be talking about a post-work world, right? So take an example of Apple Computers, 40,000 employees of Apple. By the way, the wealthiest company in the world right now, with only 40,000 employees. This year knocked Exxon out of the #1 spot. Right? Has more cash reserves than the United States. Only 40,000 employees. 400,000 employees work for Foxconn, assembling all those devices that I see in front of you and in front of me. Foxconn this year is buying 1 million robots. You will not see that kind of rote, repetitive, skilled labor delegated out to human beings in the future. If you take a look, those of you who flew in for this conference, you probably went through a kiosk, put a credit card number in, had multiple databases checked in an instantaneous amount of time, your credit card database, the airlines database, the security database, seating database, all kinds of other things that were accessed. Your bag tag was printed, someone else at the counter is going to get it in a second, and you've done all of that without any human intervention. This is the age of smart machines. And we will look increasingly at the question of human-augmented labor, technology-augmented labor. What is the role of human beings in that, and what kind of work will we actually do? So the Institute for the Future is a fascinating group. You can go Google them. They're based in San Francisco. They did a big study on this question, and they said, here are the drivers of the change, among other things. We all live longer. We have a labor force that was predicated in the United States on the notion that you would retire at age 62. And now, of course, we have people living much longer than that. Our whole system is built on that notion. Smart machines and neural networks, the idea that intelligence. How many of you know Watson, the IBM computer that participated in a game show? Within the next 18 months, Watson will be reading at a 6th grade level. Watson processes millions of pages per second. So one of the most interesting rollouts of Watson, for example, has been to augment physicians, human-augmented, technology-augmented work. Because physicians cannot possibly read all of the new research and information coming out in medical journals and elsewhere and keep up. So Watson is being used for first phase diagnosis. It narrows down to a set of percentages, the likely issue, and then the physician takes over at that point. It takes out all of the rote work and leaves human work to things like judgment, meaning making, making sense of the thing. So massive processing and sensors. Do you all know the phrase big data? The idea that we measure everything at really granular levels. We now see data embedded into everything. Sensors that will be, so your phone, for example, registers your location every 8 seconds. That's embedded data. That's data that can be used in some fashion. And that data is built into more and more of the things we do every day. New media literacies. I keep a campus blog and a Twitter account, and it is a new kind of communication for a college president that was not available to me 5 years ago. And it allows me to have a different kind of conversation with my campus and with my stakeholders. So there's and you have to think differently about how you use that literacy mode. And we've had multiple new literacies. So again, I'm taking too long. I can spend a lot of time on any of these. So if that's the world that's changing, what are the things that we need to be teaching? And then look at this list and think about the classic university or college curriculum. How well do we match to this list? If you believe this, and I do. That the things we're going to be talking about that really will be important is the idea of cutting across silos. But our departments, our disciplines are organized in silos for the most part. It will be about new and adaptive thinking. We're struggling with basic skills. Can you write a paragraph? Can you write a memo? Can you write a report? Can you do basic qualitative programming? What about this? This is the highest level order kinds of thinking, and how do you teach that? Social intelligence. Machines aren't very good at navigating human beings. Human beings are pretty good at that. So Watson can process information, but it doesn't know how to interact with people. So outward-facing, human-facing interactions will probably never be given over much to machines. Sense-making. If you know the world of data analytics, right? One of the hottest fields. Every industry now driven by data analytics. Google, Facebook, Amazon, go down the list, driven by data analytics. But the ability to look at that data and make sense of that data, right? To know the business thinking that underlies that data and to put it to use, that's a human function augmented by the machine. So you see these, and you can see the ways in which we're out of step. Interestingly, when we talk about the future of work and how we have to think about educating, it's harder to work. Take a look at what happened during the most recession. In the past, we would get through economic recessions in a combination of taking less profit, taking less productivity, and keeping more people. But in the recession of 2009, take a look at unemployment loss versus productivity loss. We could stay really productive, 98% productive, with far fewer human beings involved, far fewer workers, because we could rethink how work happened. So we think about this in three ways you want to think about it. One is a great piece by Brian MacArthur in McKinsey Quarterly about the second economy, this idea of, there's a whole economy of work right now that we don't touch, that human beings don't touch, but that we engage in every day. We used to talk to students about taking a job. You graduate from university, you take a job. Today, now you have to make a job. You enter the workforce, you have to make yourself indispensable. You can't wait for work to come to you. You have to recognize opportunities and bring those forward. You have to be the proactive problem solver. You have to be the person that feels like, if we have to make cuts, this is the last person I can afford to lose. And finally, creating T-shaped employees. You're no longer an expert in X. You have to be expert in something, but you now have to be able to cut across all those silos and knowledge silos as well. It's a much more challenging way to think about who you are and what you are. This is the book that we mentioned. If you don't know Christensen's work, the keys to innovation in his mind are the following. All the companies like IBM who have successfully reinvented themselves have done so by breaking off some group. Now, here's a key distinction. Think of the phrase sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. Taking what you do now in your normal course of business and being better at it, that's sustaining innovation. That's important work. Really smart people in universities are doing that every day. How do we teach better? How do we think about knowledge better? How do we think about our facilities, et cetera, et cetera? Disruptive innovation is the innovation that happens and is a game changer, that changes everything. So if you take a look at what Amazon did to bookstores, that was a disruptive innovation. It came in and disintermediated the way people bought books and a lot of other things as a result. He also talks about disaggregating key functions and reinventing your business model. I'll come back to that in higher ed in a moment. We often get it wrong when we don't understand the job to be done. So a lot of the debates in higher education today are about solutions that the market isn't looking for. So if we take a look at, let me give you a really quick example. We were an early pioneer of 3-year degree programs. Some of you come from countries where that is the norm. It isn't in the US. 4 years is the norm. And when we look at those programs, we thought this is a great idea. This will save 25% off the cost of a college degree, right? We're going to take 1/4 out of the equation. This will be a winner. We struggled to get more than 80 new students in that program every year, and that's been a struggle every year. And then I thought about jobs to be done theory, which says we often think we're answering or getting a job done that the customer actually doesn't want done. They're doing something else. And in our case, why do American 18-year-olds go to college? If you think it's for an education, That's only a little bit of the solution. That's only a little bit of the job. Of course, that's what they're looking for, but they go to college to get out from under mom and dad, to live on a campus, to live the life they've seen depicted in television and movies, to fall in love, to drink too much on a Friday night, to play sports, to join an organization, to grow up, to reinvent themselves, and a million other things. They love that notion. That's why they come. And we had a program that said, we'll give you 25% less. That's why they weren't coming. Parents loved our solution, but they had a different job they wanted to be done. Rethinking business models, that'll be obvious in a moment. And then what he would say, and this is one of those interesting questions when you think about the innovations you're working on, are you working on innovations for the people you serve? Or are you working for innovations for those who are not served? Disruptive innovation is never in the former. Disruptive innovation gets hold, finds its traction, where people's next best option is nothing at all. So where did distance education or online education start? Not with the traditional market. It started in our country often with the military. In our case, in 1996, the US Navy, because we were a preferred provider, came to us and said, if you want to continue to be a preferred provider, too many of our sailors are dropping out when we send them out on a ship. Sort of obvious, they can't get to class. Or when we bring them to another air base, naval base, where you don't have a presence. So we want you to start developing online learning, because that will keep them in. Because if you're out on a ship, your next best option is nothing at all. So this was a no-brainer. So that's really key to think about. So in our world, the world we all share, when you think about the integration of functions, all of what we, at the heart of the learning experience are these things: creating courses, thinking through the outcomes, the learning outcomes, how they're sequenced, putting together the syllabus, finding the materials, developing the course and the things that will be in it, delivering it, intervening when students help, and all of those things that you know so well was integrated, vertically integrated in one person, the faculty member. But if you take a look at what's happening, at least in the United States today, this very mature industry that goes back to the medieval period, right, to the great universities of Europe, is being disaggregated. So now today, we often have courses that are created by subject matter experts. This goes all the way back to Britain and the Open University back in the 60s, but it's really been sort of held onto by large-scale online learning programs, we said. Choosing the text. So the faculty member who creates the course may never teach the course. It may be taught by scores of other faculty who didn't involve themselves in the creation of it. The delivery of the course, and sort of embellishing of that course may be taught by instructors, but in a place like Western Governors University, it's a self-paced learning model. At a place like BYU, Idaho, the faculty don't meet with students in their courses. They're available as a supplement to peer-to-peer learning. These are emerging, fascinating models about how people learn. And what students will tell you, if they're honest, they often learn more from each other than they do from their faculty member. This is a sort of conceit that we as academics have, that we are the fonts of all knowledge oftentimes, but in reality, the best way to learn quite often is for a student to teach somebody else. If you take a look at intervention, we have 13,000 students in our online program, and we use a third-party tutoring system. We don't offer the tutor. This happens from somebody else. If you take a look at assessment at Western Governors, the people who are involved in the delivery of the course do not do the assessment. They rely on somebody else. They separate those functions out. And then how we improve the course, how we get back to. So in all of these things, there are new experts who are working to be better than we are. So in terms of creating new courses, take a look at Saylor Foundation, the open courseware movement, for example. Take a look at what MIT X is doing in Stanford as they move their content out into the world. All of them are making this available and saying we can do it better, or at least as good, and for a lot less money. When we talk about delivery, go online and take a look at something like OpenStudy. OpenStudy is a peer-to-peer learning platform. It has 100,000 users. And the average response time when a student goes on and says, I'm working on this math problem and I can't understand it, is under 5 minutes. And the accuracy of the responses is exceedingly high, way up in the 90th percentile. And interestingly, if you're the student who needs help with that math problem and you get bad advice, the wisdom of the group comes in and says, no, wait a minute, that's not it, actually. This is how you have to think about it. And they fix it. It's a really remarkable peer-to-peer learning platform, and they're rolling out and expanding. I don't know if you know P2P University. Nothing at all conventional about this operation. It's basically, there are a lot of smart people who don't care about a college degree, but they want to learn something. and there are a lot of smart people out there who know it. So let's find a platform that links them up, because I don't care about what the end piece looks like. If you take a look at advising and intervention, Fidelis is a really interesting new startup out of the Silicon Valley focusing on those who are enlisted in the military. And they've created this whole social networking theory basis around learning mentors or guides, people in your life who can help you master the knowledge, not worrying about the university or the faculty. In terms of assessments, a lot of really good work here around game-based simulations, Western Governors Universities, separating assessment, as I said, OER Foundation starting to work at open source assessments. So a lot of different ways to think about how we assess. And probably the one that should be up there and isn't, I don't know how familiar you are with it, in the US, all the rage right now, the badges movement. So the MacArthur Foundation has put a lot of money in badges. And the notion here is that in a competency-based world, where the competencies can be pretty fine-grained, you ought to be able to have some credential that says you've mastered that thing. So an easy example is the guy or the woman who's been working in IT as a programmer forever. But now they want to get into their companies moving into mobile computing, and they need to know Roadrunner or Python. They don't need a degree. They don't want a bunch of courses. They want to get in, get their hands dirty, master the programming language, and be able to show it in a way that employers will trust, that their boss will trust, so they can get that raise and get that promotion. They can move over in the mobile computing world. And a badge would be the way you would show that. It's not a transcript. And how do you, so very early in this movement, and people are still trying to figure this out, and how do you certify badges, and how long are badges good for, and how are they defined? But there's a lot of energy going into the notion of badges. And then finally, on the back end, improving and refining. Look at the stuff that people like Newton and CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, is doing around open learning, their embedded assessments, the improvements that they're showing in student learning. Pretty remarkable stuff. The point here is, all of these things were once in the world of the individual faculty member, and many of them who did it brilliantly. But if you look at the system, it doesn't work and it doesn't scale. Those segments are now being done really, really well by other people. And as Paul Chan said earlier, there are a lot of energy now about how you combine in innovative ways, right? Steve Jobs would say, let me take these pieces and piece them together, and I'll give you an example of what we're doing around that. So 4 critical needs moving forward for disruptive innovation. One is that we have to have a lot more clarity about what it means to master something. We are in an industry that actually doesn't do a very good job talking about quality. We don't know how to define it. Our faculty will argue about it forever. We can't get to agreement. The reality in the United States is that someone's introduction to general psychology, accepted here for 3 credits, is not accepted at this university over here for 3 credits. Well, ours is better. Well, how do you know? And what are the learning outcomes? Why don't they match? Enormous amounts of work that needs to be done right now, but it's happening right now. So in our country, you've got major foundations like the Lumina Foundation. This is the largest funder of higher education in the US, which has something called the Tuning Project, where they're getting groups of universities to agree on the learning outcomes of the courses that they all teach. We all teach probably the same 30 courses at the core in the United States. Can we agree on what those outcomes are? And they're also doing something called the degree profile, which does the same thing, but at the degree level. So what does it mean to have an associate's degree in accounting? What does it mean to have a bachelor's degree in accounting? What should those outcomes be? The second thing is to, in the United States, we still think about, there's a fixed and a variable in our learning models in the US. The fixed is that I can tell you with certainty that someone's going to sit in a desk for 14 to 15 weeks. Never varies. They might miss a class from time to time. Here's the variable. Not everyone's going to learn the same amount. This makes no sense, right? So we're trying to flip, we're trying to find models that say, the thing that ought to be fixed is mastery, that you actually know the thing we said you know, and it shouldn't matter how long, how fast, or how slow you go. If you need 2 years to master your college writing course, take 2 years. If you can show us that you know basic college math in a week, take a week. Why are we going to stick you in a course for, but even our funding is built around this. The way we assign faculty workload, the way we schedule our classrooms. We have built a huge infrastructure around this very antiquated notion. Modularization. Why do we organize in the United States knowledge into 3 credit chunks that basically take maybe 15 weeks? It makes no sense. So there's a lot of talk in the competency movement to getting really fine-grained. You might get a badge for mastering the basic paragraph. You sort of cringe a little bit and say, American college students are working on paragraph structure? Absolutely. 50% of them are not ready to do pre-college writing, a failure of our high school system perhaps, not to point the finger. But, so we might get really fine-grained on these things, but we build and aggregate competencies into something else. And then how do we know? And this is the real issue now. Employers are saying, you know what? I don't care about the transcript. Show me. So we're doing a lot of work around portfolio assessment, the ability to show the evidence of learning, so you link a competency to the actual evidence so someone can go in and take a look at that. 4 areas of innovation. One is finding ways to recognize learning that happens, that the student brings with them. Now I'm talking about adult learners. We've got 40 million Americans, adults, who are in the workforce, sometimes out of the workforce, with a little bit of college credit and no degree. They are in an untenable situation going forward. So we have to find ways to acknowledge and capture what they already know. They've learned some stuff along the way. We also need to design learning models that use the real world as a learning environment. We do a really interesting program called College Unbound. So in America, you learn in the classroom and you supplement that learning in an internship. College Unbound flips it. It says we're going to design all of your learning as project-based out in the world, and we'll just plug in classroom work for the gaps. So you're working on a project, you're in a biotech firm, and there's some math you don't know, right? And if you think about learning that way, where people are following the passions, this is the world I want to be in, I'm working in that place. I hate math, but if that piece of math is what you need to be successful, all of a sudden math becomes really exciting and important. You want to learn that math because you're really excited. It really is very, very dramatic. And then badges I've talked about. So in the new model, I'm going to quickly run through. We have something called the Pathways Project. Very ambitious. It's going to pilot in January of 13. We just found out last week that it is a finalist for the Gates Foundation New Generation Learning Challenge. So we'll find out soon if we get the Gates money, but we're going to go forward with it or without. And the question we were inspired by Mohammed Yunus of the Grameen Bank. He was asked in an interview how he came up with the idea of the Grameen Bank and microlending. You all know his work. The Grameen Bank is famous for microenterprise microlending. And he said, well, I thought to myself, what do banks do? And whatever they do, I'll do the opposite. So banks lend to men, I'll lend to women. Banks require collateral, I don't require any. Banks require you to come into the bank, I'll go out to the village. And he had this whole list of things. So we thought, could we use this sort of heuristic to think about higher ed and reinventing? So we said, here are all the things that traditional higher ed does, but we're going to start doing it opposite. So in the United States, higher education is expensive. The Pathways Project tries to make it close to free. So in our rollout model, we will be down to $2,500 for a year of college, $5,000 for an associate's degree. That's really cheap in our world, really inexpensive in our world. They talk about time fix, we're not going to care. If you can show us in the first week that you've mastered the math competency, you're done. You're done with math. Move on. If it takes you 3 years to master writing, we'll take 3 years. Learning comes to the institution, not going to happen with the Pathways Project. Our campuses are intimidating places built around 18-year-olds. You take a 30-year-old who's working, a couple of kids, trying to make soccer practice, busy life, and now their world is telling them they have to go back for a college degree. The last place they want to be quite often is a college campus. They weren't very successful last time they were there, probably. We use acronyms they don't understand. Our office is closed just when they're available in the early evening. They're surrounded by all these cool kids with backpacks and their pants halfway down their butts who don't look like them, right? It doesn't look like the place you want to be if you're 30 years old in a different world. So we're going to go to them, and we're partnering with large-scale employers like ConAgra Foods and everything, and we've blown up the notion of the curriculum, and we've gone to something we've called the Knowledge Map. The Knowledge Map is a set of 90 competencies at 3 levels. At each level, so the first level you say, wait a minute, you have 4 over here. Yeah, we do have 4. The first one is kind of a launch pad. It's orientation and developmental. So there's some things we need to do to get you ready to go. But the 3 levels above that are 90 competencies, and they roughly correspond to 20 college credits. At 60, you're halfway to an American undergraduate degree, you have an associate's degree. You get a badge for every one of those boxes, you get a certificate at the first 2 levels, you get an associate's degree at the 3rd. And we use prior learning assessments to see what you bring to the table, you plug those in, you start checking off boxes. And we map these against a whole series of really solid, a bunch of solid research studies and studies of employers about what matters. So we've drilled down every one of these competencies. At every one of those boxes is an assessment, and we're partnering with ETS, who do the SATs, right? We wanted a rock solid, respectable assessment partner so no one would question this weird model. And every one of those boxes has an underlying place in a portfolio. So if you have a doubt, so when someone says, I've mastered the ability to present, you know, there'll be some way of assessing. You'll take a look at that as somebody who's looking at this unorthodox transcript. But you can click and go in and take a look at a YouTube video, or a number of them, of somebody in the front of a room presenting. Do they actually have and possess the skills, the mastery that you're looking for? Here's our philosophy about this. What are we claiming? That the best way to show what we know is to show. Is to be able to demonstrate, right? And to do that against the competencies that people tell us matter. Now look, we're not trying to solve everyone's problems here. This is geared to a very specific cohort. Working adults who need college degrees. This isn't the 18-year-old who needs to live on a campus. But what Clayton's theory would tell you is that if this gets traction in one place, it will move up. That's the thing we've learned about disruptive technology. We talk about now, could we imagine a future where students live on our campus but learn away from our campus? Because we're doing two different jobs. They'll live on our campus for all that stuff I talked about earlier that matters to them, but they'll learn perhaps in a very different way. And the transcript, which is really a pallid representation of what people know, gets replaced with something much, much richer in terms of capturing what people have mastered. And finally, we talk about who manages input should not be responsible for measuring outputs. This is, again, that desire to be able to show with authenticity. So here's the thing that we talk about. This is from a piece I wrote in the Christian Science Monitor newspaper. If we can say for certain what it means to master something, and we are rock solid assured about how we measure it, then we shouldn't care how someone comes to do mastery, right? We shouldn't care. So higher education in America has always been about the inputs. How big is your library? How many volumes do you have? How many PhDs on the faculty? How beautiful is the facility? Increasingly, it's about, do you have a climbing wall and a food court? Do you have single rooms and high-speed internet access and cable television? It's all this other stuff. And if all that were sort of in place, we assumed the output was pretty good. This argues for the opposite. Let's be crystal clear about the output, and let's not care. So the Pathways Project rolls out with our corporate partners. It basically says to them, universities in this role are curators. We organize learning, we organize assessment, we certify, but you can be our partner in delivering. You can be the university. And to that end, we're using a lot of social media theory and networking theory to drive the learning. So that's it. I think I'm on time. Ooh, right on time. Thank you very much.